Before we dive into this incredible Viking tale, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Your support helps us bring you more amazing historical stories. Don't forget to comment below. Tell us what you think about this emotional journey, and let us know what other historical stories you'd like to see. Every subscription, like, and comment helps our channel grow and reach more people who love these powerful narratives. Now let's begin this unforgettable story. The morning mist clung to the fjord like the breath of sleeping gods, and Ragnar Ironside knew it would be the last dawn he would see from his own lands. The Viking king stood at the edge of his longhouse's great hall, watching the sun struggle through grey clouds that seemed to mirror the weight pressing down on his broad shoulders. At 35 winters, he had led his people through countless raids and battles, but never had he faced an enemy as relentless as the one now approaching his shores. The sound of hurried footsteps on wooden planks drew his attention. His most trusted warrior, Ulf the Redbeard, burst through the heavy oak doors, his face grim beneath his iron helmet. "My lord," Ulf gasped, still catching his breath from his sprint across the settlement. "The Danish fleet. They're less than half a day's sail from our coast. 50 ships, maybe more. Eric Bloodaxe leads them himself." Ragnar's jaw tightened. Eric Bloodaxe had been growing his power for years, swallowing smaller kingdoms like a great whale consuming schools of fish. Now he had come for Ragnar's realm, the last independent territory standing between Eric and complete dominance over the northern seas. "How long do we have?" Ragnar asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. "They'll reach our beaches by midday, perhaps sooner if the wind holds," Ulf replied. "The scouts counted our forces. We have maybe 200 warriors fit for battle. They bring at least 1,000. The mathematics of war were brutally simple. Even with the advantage of defending their own shores, Ragnar's forces would be overwhelmed. He had always known this day might come, but he had hoped for more time. Time to see his people prosper, time to watch his young son grow into a man. "Gather the council," Ragnar commanded, "and send word to the women and children. They must prepare to flee inland to the hidden caves beyond the great oak grove. Take only what they can carry." As Ulf rushed to carry out his orders, Ragnar's thoughts turned to the most precious thing he would leave behind. His son, Leif, barely 8 winters old, with eyes blue as summer skies and hair like spun gold. The boy's mother, Astrid, had died bringing him into the world, and since then Ragnar had been both father and mother to the child. The great hall filled quickly with the sound of urgent voices. The council members, grizzled warriors and wise elders, took their places around the central fire pit. Their faces reflected the same grim understanding that weighed on Ragnar's heart. They had all seen the signs, had all known that Eric's ambition would eventually turn toward their lands. "We cannot win this battle," declared Thorvald the Grey, the oldest among them. His weathered hands gripped his walking staff as he spoke. "But we can make Eric pay dearly for his victory, perhaps costly enough that he'll think twice before moving against other free settlements." "Aye," agreed Gunnar One-Eye, fingering the battle-axe at his side. "Let us die with weapons in our hands and send as many of these Danish dogs to Valhalla as we can manage." Ragnar listened to his warrior's brave words, feeling pride swell in his chest even as sorrow threatened to overwhelm him. These men had followed him through storm and battle, had trusted his leadership through lean winters and abundant summers. They deserved better than to die protecting a lost cause. "There is another way," came a voice from the shadows near the hall's entrance. All heads turned toward the speaker. A figure emerged from the dim light, tall, lean, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of nobility despite his travel-worn clothes. Ragnar recognized him immediately. Hakon the Wise, a jarl from the western fjords, known for his diplomatic skills and strategic mind. "Hakon," Ragnar said, rising from his carved wooden throne, "what brings you to my hall at such a dark hour?" "Word of Eric's advance reached my ears 3 days ago," Hakon replied, stepping into the firelight. "I came as quickly as I could, hoping to arrive before the battle commenced." "Then you've come to die with us," Gunnar said grimly. "There's honor in that." Hakon shook his head slowly. "I've come to offer an alternative to death, though it may be no less painful for some." The hall fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Ragnar studied the visiting Jarl's face, seeing something there that spoke of carefully laid plans and difficult choices. "Speak plainly, Hakon. What do you propose?" Eric Bloodaxe is many things: ruthless, ambitious, cruel when it serves his purposes. But he is also practical. He gains nothing from completely destroying your people. Dead Vikings cannot row his ships or work his fields. He wants your submission, your warriors sworn to his service, your lands added to his growing kingdom. You suggest we kneel to him." Thorvald's voice carried the outrage that several others felt. "That we bend our necks like thralls? I suggest you consider what will happen to your families if you don't," Hakon replied calmly. "Eric will take your lands regardless. The question is whether your wives become widows, your children become orphans, and your settlements become ash and bone." Ragnar felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him like a mountain. Every decision he made would ripple through the lives of hundreds of people who trusted him. The warrior in him wanted to stand and fight, to die with sword in hand as his ancestors had done, but the father in him thought of young Leif, and the protector in him considered all the innocent lives that hung in the balance. "What exactly are you proposing?" Ragnar asked quietly. "Negotiation. Eric is camped on Seal Island just offshore. He always offers terms before battle. It's part of his method. Submit now with dignity intact, and your people live. Your warriors become his warriors, your lands become part of his kingdom, but your families survive and your culture endures." "And our honor?" asked Ulf, his red beard bristling with indignation. "Honor doesn't feed children or protect wives from raiders," Hakon said bluntly. "Honor doesn't rebuild burned homes or replace slaughtered livestock. Sometimes wisdom means choosing the hard path over the proud one." Ragnar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of centuries of Viking tradition, warring with the practical needs of the present moment. His own father had died in battle rather than submit to a stronger enemy. His grandfather before him had done the same. It was the way of their people, to fight until death rather than accept defeat. But times were changing. The old ways of isolated settlements and constant raiding were giving way to larger kingdoms and more organized warfare. Perhaps survival lay not in clinging to the past, but in adapting to the future. "If I were to consider such terms," Ragnar said slowly, "what guarantee do we have that Eric would honor them?" "His reputation," Hakon replied. "Whatever else Eric may be, he keeps his word when it's given publicly. To break sworn oaths would undermine his authority over his other conquered territories. He needs the people he rules to believe they can trust his promises." The debate continued for another hour, with passionate arguments on both sides. Some warriors spoke of duty to their ancestors and the shame of submission. Others thought of their children's futures and the practical benefits of survival. Through it all, Ragnar remained silent, weighing possibilities and consequences. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and the sounds of preparation for Eric's arrival grew louder outside, Ragnar made his decision. "I will meet with Eric Bloodaxe," he announced. "I will hear his terms, but I make no promises beyond that." The hall erupted in voices, some supporting, others protesting. But Ragnar's word was final, and gradually the dissent died down. "Ulf, prepare a delegation boat. Just you, me, and Hakon. The rest of you continue preparations for defense. If these negotiations fail, we'll need to be ready." As the council dispersed, Ragnar felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to see his son Leif standing beside him, the boy's blue eyes wide with questions he was too young to understand. "Father, why does everyone look so worried?" Leif asked in his clear, innocent voice. Ragnar knelt down to bring himself to eye level with his son. How could he explain the complexities of politics and war to an 8-year-old? How could he prepare the boy for the possibility that everything in their world was about to change? Sometimes, Leif, leaders must make very difficult choices. Choices that affect many people. I'm trying to make the best choice I can for our people and for you. Will you have to go away? Leif asked, and Ragnar heard the fear beneath the question. I don't know yet, my son. But whatever happens, remember that I love you more than life itself. Remember that you are the most precious thing in all the 9 realms to me. Leif nodded solemnly, understanding perhaps more than his young years should have allowed. Ragnar pulled the boy close, breathing in the scent of his hair and memorizing the feel of small arms around his neck. An hour later, Ragnar stood in a small boat, cutting through the grey waters toward Seal Island. The Danish fleet spread across the horizon like a dark stain, their dragon-headed prows pointing toward his homeland like accusing fingers. Each ship represented dozens of armed warriors, experienced fighters who had conquered settlement after settlement under Eric's banner. As they approached the largest vessel, Ragnar could see Eric Bloodaxe himself standing at the prow. Even from a distance, the Danish king's presence was imposing, tall and broad, with dark hair and a carefully groomed beard that spoke of vanity alongside his reputation for violence. Gold arm rings caught the sunlight, and his red cloak snapped in the sea breeze like a banner of war. Remember, Hakon murmured as they drew closer, Eric respects strength, but he also respects intelligence. Don't let pride override pragmatism. Ragnar nodded, steeling himself for what might be the most important conversation of his life. The boat bumped against the side of Eric's longship, and rope ladders were thrown down for them to climb. Moments later, Ragnar found himself standing on the deck of his enemy's ship, surrounded by Danish warriors whose eyes held the confident gleam of men who had rarely tasted defeat. Eric Bloodaxe studied him with dark eyes that seemed to weigh and measure every detail. Ragnar Ironside, Eric said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. I had wondered if you would come. Some kings prefer to die fighting rather than discuss terms. Some kings have nothing left to lose, Ragnar replied evenly. I have people to consider beyond myself. Eric smiled, and Ragnar saw approval flicker in those dark eyes. Wisdom. Good. I prefer practical men to proud fools. It makes negotiations so much more productive. The Danish king gestured toward a tent that had been erected on the ship's deck. Come. Let us speak of the future, yours and your people's. As they entered the tent, Ragnar felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. What happened in the next few hours would determine not just his own fate, but the destiny of everyone who looked to him for protection and leadership. His hand unconsciously moved to the small silver pendant at his throat, a gift from Astrid before she died, inscribed with a prayer for their son's protection. Whatever came next, Ragnar would face it with the knowledge that every choice was made in service of those he loved most. The negotiation began with the sound of wind and waves outside, and the creak of ship timbers that seemed to echo the groaning weight of impossible decisions. The tent's interior was surprisingly luxurious for a ship-based pavilion. Rich furs covered the deck planks, and braziers provided warmth against the sea's chill. Eric Bloodaxe sat in a carved chair that had clearly been brought specifically for these negotiations, while Ragnar and Hakon were offered simpler seats across from him. 2 Danish jarls flanked their king, hard-faced men whose battle scars spoke of countless victories. One was introduced as Sigurd Snakeeye, Eric's chief strategist, whose calculating gaze seemed to dissect every word and gesture. The other was Magnus the Cruel, whose reputation for brutality in conquered territories preceded him like a dark shadow. Wine? Eric offered, gesturing to a servant who stepped forward with a silver pitcher. It's from the south, a gift from a Frankish king who values peace over war. Ragnar accepted the cup, but barely touched it to his lips. His mind needed to remain clear for what was to come. Eric noticed this and nodded approvingly, cautious. I respect that. Too many kings have lost their kingdoms because they trusted too easily or thought too slowly. Eric settled back in his chair, every movement radiating controlled power. Now, let us speak plainly. I want your territory, Ragnar Ironside. I want your warriors, your ships, your people's loyalty. The question is whether I take these things over your dead body or with your cooperation. And what do I gain from cooperation? Ragnar asked, matching Eric's direct tone. Your life, for one, the lives of your warriors, the safety of your women and children. Eric's voice remained conversational, but steel lay beneath the pleasant words. More than that, a place in my kingdom. Your warriors become my warriors, yes, but they retain their honor. Your people become my people, but they keep their customs, their homes, their families. Sigurd Snake-Eye leaned forward slightly. You've heard what happens to those who resist us completely, haven't you, Ragnar? The settlement at Hawke's Bay, Iron Wolf's stronghold? Ragnar had indeed heard. Both had been reduced to ash and bone, their populations scattered or enslaved. The message was clear without being spoken aloud. And my son? Ragnar asked quietly. What happens to Leif? Eric's expression shifted slightly, and for a moment something almost like sympathy flickered in his dark eyes. Your son would be raised as befits his station. The child of a king, even a conquered king, has value. He would be educated, trained in warfare, taught the skills needed to lead. As a hostage, Ragnar said bluntly. As insurance, Eric corrected. Your good behavior ensures his well-being. His presence in my household ensures your loyalty. Hakon spoke for the first time since entering the tent. It's not uncommon, Ragnar. Many conquered nobles have seen their children raised in the victor's court. Often, they rise to positions of significant power and responsibility. Magnus the Cruel's harsh voice cut through the diplomatic pleasantries. The boy could have a good life, or he could be orphaned today and left to the mercy of whatever family might take pity on him. The choice seems clear enough. Ragnar felt anger flare in his chest at the implied threat, but he forced his expression to remain neutral. Showing emotion now would only weaken his negotiating position. I would need to see the terms written down, he said carefully. Agreements about my people's treatment, my warrior's status, my son's education. Eric smiled, clearly pleased by Ragnar's practical approach. Of course. Sigurd, have the scribes prepare the documents. Standard terms for noble submission, with special provisions for the boy. As Sigurd stepped out to summon the scribes, Eric leaned forward in his chair. You know, Ragnar, I've watched your career with interest. You've ruled well, fairly from what I hear. Your people are loyal not just from fear, but from respect. That's rare. Thank you, Ragnar replied cautiously, unsure where this was leading. I could use men like you in my inner circle. Oh, not immediately. There would need to be a period of proving yourself. But in time, a king who ruled as wisely as you have could find himself with significant responsibilities in a larger kingdom. The offer was tempting, and Eric was skilled enough to make it sound genuine. But Ragnar had heard enough stories about conquered kings who thought they were being elevated to positions of honor, only to discover they were simply more comfortable prisoners. I appreciate the consideration, Ragnar said non-committally. The scribes arrived, two thin men with ink-stained fingers who began spreading parchments across a low table. The sound of their quills scratching against vellum filled the tent as they worked to transform spoken agreements into written law. While they worked, Eric continued talking, painting a picture of the grand kingdom he was building. Trade routes that stretched from the frozen north to the warm southern seas. Fleets that could challenge any force in the known world. Cities that would rival the great centers of the Franks and the Byzantines. The old ways are ending, Ragnar, Eric said with conviction. Small kingdoms fighting each other over fishing rights and grazing lands, that's the past. The future belongs to those who can think beyond their own fjords, who can see the larger patterns emerging in the world. There was truth in what Eric said, Ragnar had to admit. The independent settlements and small kingdoms that had defined the Viking world for generations were indeed being absorbed into larger political entities. Perhaps resistance was not just futile, but actively harmful to his people's long-term interests. The terms are ready for your review, announced the lead scribe, a nervous man whose hands shook slightly as he presented the documents. Ragnar studied the parchments carefully, with Hakon reading over his shoulder. The terms were reasonable as far as such things went. His warriors would be incorporated into Eric's forces, with their ranks and honors intact. His people would retain their property and customs. Trade would continue, but under Eric's oversight and taxation. And life. The boy would be taken to Eric's court, educated alongside Eric's own children and those of other noble families. He would be treated well, the document assured, and prepared for eventual responsibilities within the kingdom. "How old is your son now?" Eric asked while Ragnar continued reading. 8 winters, Ragnar replied without looking up. "A good age for education to begin in earnest. My own sons started their formal training at 7 and 8. The boy will have excellent company, children of Jarls, the sons of allied kings. He'll learn languages, mathematics, strategy, diplomacy, skills that will serve him well no matter what path his life takes." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they only emphasized how completely Leif's life would be removed from everything familiar. No more running through the settlement streets, no more helping with the fishing boats, no more falling asleep to his father's stories of heroes and gods. "There is one additional provision I require," Ragnar said finally. Eric raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I want to see my son regularly, not as a prisoner visiting another prisoner, but as a father checking on his child's welfare and education, once each season at minimum." Sigurd Snakeeye, who had returned during the document review, frowned at this request. "That seems unusual. Hostages are typically kept separate from their families to prevent complications." "The boy is 8 years old," Ragnar said firmly. "He's already lost his mother. Cutting him off completely from his father would be needlessly cruel and could interfere with his proper development. A child who grows up believing his family abandoned him may not develop into the kind of loyal, capable adult you're hoping for." Eric considered this for a long moment. "You make a reasonable point. Very well. Seasonal visits, but supervised ones. And if there's any sign that these visits are being used to plan escapes or rebellions, there won't be," Ragnar assured him. More quill scratching as the scribes added this provision to the growing document. Ragnar felt each stroke of the pen like a nail being driven into a coffin, not his own death, but the death of the life he had known. "Are there any other modifications you require?" Eric asked. Ragnar thought carefully. Once he signed this document, there would be no going back. His signature would bind not just himself, but his entire people to Eric's rule. "My warriors, who choose to leave rather than serve you, they must be allowed to depart freely with their families and possessions. Granted, within reason. They can't take our ships or weapons naturally. And my people's religious practices must be protected. We honor the old gods alongside the new Christian teachings that some have adopted. No one should be forced to abandon their beliefs." Eric waved dismissively. "I care nothing for which God's people choose to worship, so long as they pay their taxes and obey their king." "Granted." The final documents were prepared as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. 3 copies in all, one for Eric, one for Ragnar, and one to be sent to the regional assembly for formal recording. As Ragnar lifted the quill to sign his name, his hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment represented. With a few strokes of ink, he would transform from an independent king to a vassal, from a free man to something else. "Having second thoughts?" Eric asked quietly. "A man would be a fool not to have second thoughts about such a decision," Ragnar replied. "But sometimes the right choice is also the hardest choice." He signed his name with firm, clear strokes. The ink glistened wetly on the parchment for a moment before beginning to dry, sealing the fate of everyone who had trusted him to lead them well. Eric smiled with genuine satisfaction. "Excellent. The transition will begin immediately. My men will accompany you back to shore to begin organizing the integration of our forces, and of course, to collect young Leif." The reality of it hit Ragnar like a physical blow. Today. They wanted to take his son today. Somehow he had imagined there would be more time, a chance to prepare the boy, to say proper goodbyes. "So soon?" he managed to ask. "Delay serves no purpose," Eric said, though his tone was not unkind. "The boy will adapt more quickly if the change is made cleanly, and your people will see that the new order begins immediately. There's less chance for second thoughts or resistance movements to develop." Håkon placed a steadying hand on Ragnar's shoulder. "It's better this way, old friend. Like removing a spear point, quick and clean causes less damage than slow and hesitant." Ragnar nodded numbly. Intellectually, he knew they were right. Emotionally, the thought of watching his son sail away into an uncertain future made his chest feel like it was being crushed by a great weight. "I'll want to speak with him first," Ragnar said, "to explain what's happening, to prepare him." "Of course," Eric agreed. "Take what time you need for that conversation. But understand that by sunset, the boy sails with my fleet." As they prepared to leave Eric's ship, the Danish king offered one final comment. "You've made the right choice today, Ragnar Ironside. In time, you'll see that this serves your son's interests as well as your people's. The boy will have opportunities in my court that he never could have had in a small settlement, no matter how well ruled." Ragnar wanted to argue, to point out all the things Leif would lose in exchange for these supposed opportunities. But the contracts were signed, the decisions made. All that remained was the hardest part of all, telling an 8-year-old boy that his entire world was about to change forever. As their boat pulled away from Eric's longship, carrying them back toward shore, Ragnar stared at his homeland's coastline and tried to memorize every detail. After today, he would still live there, still walk those familiar paths and sleep in his own hall, but it would never again be truly his. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded him uncomfortably of blood and fire. Soon, very soon, he would have to find words to explain the unexplainable to the most important person in his world. The boat carried them steadily toward shore, toward the conversation that would break his heart and change his son's life forever. Behind them, Eric's fleet waited like patient predators, ready to claim their newest prize. The great hall of Eric Bloodaxe's capital had grown larger and more magnificent in the decade since that fateful day on Seal Island. Tapestries from distant lands adorned the walls, and the wealth of a dozen conquered territories glittered in every golden ornament and silver drinking cup. At the high table, now 18 winters old, sat Leif. No longer the frightened boy who had sailed away in tears, but a young man whose bearing showed the confidence of noble education and warrior training. His hair had darkened from childhood gold to honey brown, but his eyes remained the same striking blue that had reminded Ragnar so painfully of his lost Astrid. Ragnar himself, now greying at the temples but still strong, watched his son with a mixture of pride and melancholy. The quarterly visits had continued as promised, allowing him to witness Leif's transformation from a settlement child into a sophisticated member of Eric's court. The boy had excelled at his studies, languages, mathematics, strategy, diplomacy. He could speak Frankish and Latin as fluently as Norse, could calculate trade profits and military logistics with equal skill. But sometimes, in unguarded moments, Ragnar glimpsed the child Leif had been, curious, spontaneous, connected to the rhythms of sea and season that had shaped their simple life together. That boy seemed increasingly distant, buried beneath layers of courtly education and political sophistication. "Your son has become quite accomplished," Eric said, settling into the chair beside Ragnar. The Danish king had aged more visibly, his dark hair now heavily streaked with silver, but his eyes remained as sharp and calculating as ever. "My military advisors speak highly of his strategic insights, and he's proven quite gifted at negotiations with our trading partners." "He's had excellent teachers," Ragnar replied diplomatically. "Indeed, but natural ability cannot be taught, only refined. The boy, the young man, has a mind for leadership. I've been considering what role might best suit his talents." Ragnar felt a familiar stab of conflicted emotion. Pride in his son's accomplishments warred with resentment that those accomplishments served Eric's ambitions rather than their own people's needs. "What did you have in mind?" he asked carefully. "There's a territory to the west that requires delicate handling. The locals have been restive since their king died, without clear succession. They need someone who understands both diplomacy and strength. Someone young enough to seem like a fresh start, but educated enough to handle complex political situations." The implications were clear. Eric was considering sending Leif to rule a conquered territory as his representative, a position of significant responsibility, but also one that would move the young man even further from his origins. "It would be good experience for him," Eric continued, "and it would demonstrate my confidence in his abilities. Of course, success in such a role could lead to even greater responsibilities in time." Across the hall, Leif was deep in conversation with several other young nobles, their discussion animated and clearly intellectual. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this world of politics and power, who had found his place among the educated elite of Eric's expanding kingdom. "He seems happy," Ragnar said quietly, more to himself than to Eric. "He is happy," Eric confirmed. "This is the life he was meant for, Ragnar. Can you honestly say he would have been better served remaining in a small coastal settlement, learning to mend nets and count fishing boats?" The question stung because Ragnar couldn't answer it with certainty. Leif had indeed flourished in Eric's court, had developed capabilities and knowledge that never could have emerged in their simple homeland. But something had been lost too, some essential connection to the land and sea and people that had shaped their family for generations. "He's still my son," Ragnar said firmly. "Of course he is, and you've done well by him, even in this difficult situation. But he's also become something more, a bridge between the old ways and the new order I'm building. That's no small achievement." As if sensing their attention, Leif looked across the hall and caught sight of his father. The young man's face brightened with genuine warmth, and he excused himself from his conversation to approach their table. "Father," he said, embracing Ragnar with obvious affection, "I didn't realize you had arrived. How are things at home?" "Well enough," Ragnar replied, holding his son perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "The harvest was good this year. Your friend Olaf married the blacksmith's daughter. You remember Olaf?" Leif smiled, but Ragnar could see that the memory required effort to recall. "Of course. Send them my congratulations when you return." They talked for a while about people and places from Leif's childhood, but the conversation felt increasingly forced. The gap between their worlds had grown too wide for easy bridging, despite the love that remained strong between them. Later that evening, as the feast wound down and many of the guests had departed, Ragnar found himself alone with his son on one of the hall's great balconies. The view stretched across Eric's capital city, a thriving center of trade and administration that housed thousands of people from dozens of conquered territories. "Eric tells me he's considering you for a significant assignment," Ragnar said. Leif nodded, his expression serious in the moonlight. "The Western Territories. It would be challenging, but also an opportunity to prove myself. Is that what you want? To prove yourself to Eric?" The question seemed to surprise Leif. "He's been like a father to me in his way. He's given me education, opportunities, a chance to be part of something larger than myself. Why wouldn't I want to prove worthy of his confidence?" The words hit Ragnar like physical blows, even though he knew Leif didn't intend them cruelly. In the young man's mind, Eric had indeed been more of a father than Ragnar himself, present for the daily guidance and education that shaped adolescence, available for advice and encouragement through the challenges of growing up. "Do you ever miss it?" Ragnar asked quietly. "The settlement? The simple life we had?" Leif was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the city lights. "Sometimes," he admitted finally. "I remember the smell of the sea, the sound of gulls in the morning. I remember your stories about the gods and heroes, but father, I was a child then. I see now how limited that world was, how small our horizons were. Here, I can affect the lives of thousands of people. I can help shape the future of entire regions. And that matters to you? It does. Eric has shown me that there's more to leadership than just protecting your own people. There's building something lasting, something that can bring peace and prosperity to lands that have known only war and struggle. Ragnar heard Eric's words and philosophy in his son's speech, but he also heard genuine conviction. Leif truly believed in the vision he was articulating, had made it his own rather than simply accepting it as imposed doctrine. "I'm proud of you," Ragnar said, and meant it. "Whatever else has happened, you've grown into a remarkable young man." "Thank you, father. That means a great deal to me." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, father and son separated by circumstances, but still connected by bonds that political arrangements could not fully sever. "Will you accept Eric's offer?" Ragnar asked finally. "I think so. It's time for me to test myself in real responsibility, not just training exercises and theoretical studies." Ragnar nodded, accepting what he could not change. His son was no longer the boy who had sailed away in tears 10 years ago. Leif had become exactly what Eric had promised, a capable, educated leader prepared for significant responsibilities in a larger world. But sometimes, in the young man's smile or the way he gestured while speaking, Ragnar caught glimpses of the child he had raised and lost. Those moments were precious beyond measure. Reminders that love could survive even the most dramatic changes in circumstance. As they prepared to part again, Ragnar to return to his coastal settlement, Leif to remain in Eric's court and prepare for his new assignment, both father and son carried the knowledge that their relationship had evolved into something different from what either had expected. Not worse, necessarily, but certainly more complex and bittersweet. The promise Eric had made that day on Seal Island had been kept. Leif had been protected, educated, and prepared for a future of opportunity and responsibility. But promises, Ragnar had learned, could be fulfilled in ways that satisfied the letter of an agreement while transforming its spirit into something altogether different. Standing on the balcony as his son disappeared back into the hall's warmth and light, Ragnar whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. That Leif would find happiness and purpose in the path he had chosen, and that someday, perhaps, the boy from the coastal settlement might glimpse the world again through eyes unclouded by political ambition. The moon set over Eric's capital, casting long shadows across a kingdom built on conquered dreams and transformed loyalties. In the morning, Ragnar would begin his journey home, carrying memories of a son who had become both more and less than either of them had imagined possible. The saga continued, as all sagas must, with both triumph and loss intertwined like threads in a tapestry too complex for simple judgment. Love had endured, but love alone could not bridge all the distances that time and circumstance had created. And in his heart, Ragnar carried both pride in what his son had become and grief for the simpler life they would never share again. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this epic Viking tale, subscribe for more incredible historical stories, and comment below with your thoughts. Did Eric keep his promise? Was Ragnar's sacrifice worth it? Let us know what you think and tell us what other historical stories you'd like to see brought to life.